Welcome to JW Broadcasting.
It's that time of the month again, JW Broadcasting time, and this time, Jehovah's Witnesses are gonna tell you all about their updated LGBTQ stance, but not before telling you all about how humble you need to be, which means you need to obey the governing body. But let's start by Gary here asking Jehovah's Witnesses to do something impossible.
Have you ever considered who is the greatest example of humility? If your answer is Jehovah, you're correct. Why? Because every living, intelligent creation is inferior to him, yet he chose to and continues to include others in his activities.
Jehovah cannot be humble, and neither can any being with limitations. Why? Because being humble is being aware of your limitations and being aware of the fact that you are not the center of the universe. Those two things are literally not applicable to you if you are an all-powerful, all-knowing God that created the universe. You may make the case that God is humble because he came down to live with us as a human, literally lowering himself for us if you're a Trinitarian, but Jehovah's Witnesses are not. Jehovah's Witnesses have an almost insane aversion to saying that they follow Jesus, a topic that I might make a video about later. This, however, forces them to project literally every positive value onto Jehovah, because they don't follow Jesus, they follow Jehovah. And what Gary said to open his speech is one of the best examples I've seen of that quirk in a while. Because if he wanted to make the point that you need to be humble with the Bible, he could have just literally used Jesus instead. He humbly accepted God's mission to lower himself, become a being with limitations, and suffer for our benefit, even praying about how he was doing all of this because it was his Father's way of doing things. There are multiple verses that talk about Jesus helping the most humble, most marginalized people. Heck, he literally washed his disciples' feet, for crying out loud. Jesus is supposed to be a literally perfect example of humility. But then Gary would have to say something like, being humble reflects how we follow Jesus Christ. And that's not what Jehovah's Witnesses do now, is it? No. Jehovah's Witnesses follow Jehovah. And Jehovah represents everything good. Humility is good, which means that Jehovah is humble. And if that means rewriting the meaning of the word, well, that wouldn't be the first time, would it?
Humility can be described as lowliness of mind and being free from pride and arrogance. A humble person finds happiness in including others in his life and endeavors.
The first part is somewhat accurate, but also proves my point. You shouldn't be proud or arrogant because that would mean you have an exaggerated sense of self-importance. However, if you're a God who created everything in the universe exclusively for his glory, then you are literally the one thing in all existence that can never be arrogant, because literally everything else was created to give you glory. If you're in a plane and say, I can fly the plane better than the pilot, you're arrogant if you're not a pilot, but you're stating a fact if you're teaching the current pilot how to fly the plane. Seriously, Jehovah has angels that literally perpetually sing to him how awesome he is from the beginning of times until the end of times. Jehovah's Witnesses, however, twist the meaning of the word by saying that Jehovah, you see, is humble because he allows humans to work for him. And how do we work for him? By obeying everything this cult has to say, of course.
Jehovah's great measure of humility became apparent when he collaborated with his only begotten Son and included him as his master worker in creation. Later, as angels were created, these mighty spirit creatures imitated the humility already being shown by Jehovah. These faithful angels were free from pride and arrogance. This resulted in everyone in heaven enjoying peace for eons of time. Humility in heaven was like oil to an engine. It keeps things running smoothly. Satan was the first one to succumb to the temptation of pride and arrogance, rejecting the godlike quality of humility. When he did so, rebellion and turmoil soon followed.
Oh, I guess a father is humble when he teaches his child how to do anything under this logic, because humble is when you create a new being to teach them how to do the things that you can already do, I guess? It's also when you create legions of angels exclusively to tell you how amazing you are forever and ever. This is Jehovah's Witnesses' interpretation of heaven because that's what they want their followers to be. Complacent and telling the leadership how superior and awesome they are 24/7. And if God is humble when that happens, then the leadership is humble when they expect you to do the same for them. Lack of humility is when you think you can interpret Jehovah better than the governing body because that's rebellion and that's what Satan did. That's not me saying this. That's pretty much what Gary goes on to say.
Jehovah knows that the quality of humility will help us in our imperfect condition. For example, it will help us to imitate him, to faithfully serve him, and to survive the end of this system of things. Yes, Jehovah knows that humility will enrich our lives today and eternally.
To be good with Jehovah and survive his genocide, you need to be humble enough to obey whatever the governing body interprets Jehovah to want. After all, Jesus obeyed Jehovah and he is going to execute anyone who doesn't. Do you want to die or do you want to obey the governing body? Did I mention this is a cult?
Jesus has already reaffirmed these timeless standards in heaven. Soon he'll do the same for the earth, with a commission to save only those who are humble and obedient. Our developing and displaying humility, then, is essential to our survival.
This is the most apocalyptic speech they've had in a while, and it appeals to the main reason why Jehovah's Witnesses are staying in this religion: the fear of dying in Armageddon, which, remember, will happen any day now. Jehovah's Witnesses obey mainly due to fear of getting caught, fear of getting disciplined in public, and fear of getting executed by Jesus and the governing body during Armageddon. At this point, I bet you're itching to know how you can tell if you're humble enough. So Gary is here to remind you that being humble is all about appearances.
If you want to know if you're truly humble at heart, ask yourself, how do others view me? If you serve as a congregation elder, do your fellow elders feel comfortable giving you counsel? When was the last time they did so? How did you react? If you're serving as a pioneer, do you endeavor to learn from those with less experience? Do our loved ones and our family feel that we really consider their opinion on matters?
I am yet to find another cult that's more concerned with appearances than this one. Being humble in this cult is all about appearing to be humble and making sure everyone knows you are submitted to this cult. It's not about, say, recognizing your need for God, putting others before yourself, or even admitting when you're wrong. That's not what Jehovah's Witnesses do. You're humble as long as you give the appearance of obeying this cult.
In contrast, pride and arrogance are directly related to deception. An arrogant person covers up his weaknesses and failures. And that can only last so long because eventually pride leads to a crash, as Proverbs 16 verse 18 warns us.
If an arrogant person covers up his failures, then what are the governing body and the leadership of this religion after covering up their 1975 failure, or their 1925 failure, or the millions now living will never die failure? Why do they always end up projecting when they try to criticize the world outside of this cult?
Like John, humility allows a brother to be an overseer at one time and one being overseen at another time. If you have the privilege to serve as a congregation elder, can you see how this spirit would benefit your entire elder body? A fifth benefit is that humility helps us to endure opposition. A humble person doesn't feel he's above being reproached. He's able to endure unpleasant situations and not retaliate if Jehovah permits him to suffer adversity.
This is all about the most important thing that you can be in a cult: complacent. And this is why this speech is here. It's all about being complacent and doing whatever the cult wants you to do, regardless of whether it's supervising that others do what the cult wants them to do, or being supervised while you do what the cult wants you to do. This is drilled into the brains of Jehovah's Witnesses so hard that any disobedience or sign of the slightest rebellion against the governing body will always be seen as the person being too arrogant, because humility in this cult is not actual humility, it's complacency. If you don't comply with the cult, then you are arrogant.
Cultivate a desire to be humble to your very core. Frequently remind yourself that to please God, you must be humble. Also remember that pride and arrogance are traits of Satan. Keep the correct perspective by meditating on your insignificance compared to Jehovah. And pray to Jehovah for help to display humility as he does.
Jehovah can't display humility because he has no limitations to recognize. But seriously, this checklist summarizes everything that's wrong with how this religion indoctrinates people. There's nothing in here about acknowledging your dependence on God, or on serving others selflessly, or on forgiving and loving like Jesus, which would be a Christian way to teach humility, because they are not actually teaching humility. They're teaching complacency. That's why you need to cultivate the desire to be complacent. Remember that that's what God wants you to do. And if you don't do it, then you're just like Satan. You also have to spend time thinking how insignificant you are compared to God. And the most important thing, pray that you become complacent even when this cult demands too much of you, which will be constantly. This was an extremely manipulative speech that combines a whole bunch of the Jehovah's Witnesses' favorite indoctrination tools, like changing the meaning of words, reminding people of the importance of appearances, and threatening you with destruction if you don't comply. It is insane to me that cults like this one can so easily say all of these things to overtly manipulate people while being supported by your tax dollars. But that's all for now. Don't forget to like this video and please consider subscribing. Want to see the whole JW broadcasting analysis? Join my Patreon or become a YouTube supporter to binge it all before the next video comes out. And also to join my new Discord server. I feel so guilty because I get a lot of messages that I just cannot respond to. So there we can just chat about Jehovah's Witnesses stuff, ask for advice, socialize, or whatever. This Discord server is definitely not gonna be open forever. I will just have it open for like a few weeks, maybe a few months, so join us soon.